Call of Duty and Battlefield, two of the biggest first-person shooter franchises of the moment, but a question hangs over each one: which offers the fastest, most responsive controls? Today I'm looking at input lag in first-person shooters, crucial to the quality of the gameplay experience. Put simply, it's measured by the time taken between making that first input on the joypad and seeing a reaction on screen. The lower the latency, the faster the response and the better it feels to control, especially in FPS titles. Today I'll be testing input lag on both juggernauts of the genre, but later also looking at metrics for key titles like Overwatch, Titanfall 2, Doom and of course Halo 5. But first off, let's talk about how it's all done. All this is thanks to Nigel Woodall, who's put together a capture-based device to measure input latency. You can see Nigel's results on his Twitter account for 2D fighting games and also more in-depth tutorials. The gist of it is though, this device takes one channel from a console's component video signal, and by linking it to the contacts on a DualShock 4 to build a circuit, a color is disrupted on screen the moment you pull the R2 trigger to shoot. From there, it's a matter of going through the capture, you count the frames between that color appearing, a green line showing the first sign of a button press, and the gunshot. And from there, you have your result. It's a brilliant solution to get millisecond accuracy, but in my experience, works best by taking lots of samples and averaging the numbers out. Another thing to bear in mind is, depending on the game, different button presses take different lengths of time to register, so you have to bear that in mind. In Battlefield 1's case, for example, changing a weapon takes 5 to 6 frames from pressing the triangle button to getting a reaction on screen. Firing the gun? Well, that takes much less in Battlefield, between 3 to 4 frames. So, for all my tests here, with the exception of Halo 5, I've standardized on playing the PS4 versions using the R2 buttons to trigger a gunshot. Of course, there's something to be said for how Xbox One compares to PS4, and I'm hoping to investigate the differences down the line. But to get a good read on how Call of Duty and Battlefield stack up, we're sticking to one format today. So let's focus on Call of Duty versus Battlefield. It's a rivalry that mainly gained traction on last-gen machines. The fact is though, frame rate targets on PS3 and Xbox 360 made a huge difference to the overall latency. Battlefield was 30 FPS, but Call of Duty's push for 60 FPS is arguably the key to Activision's franchise becoming the #1 shooter of the generation. It just felt better to control. Modern Warfare 2, for example, ran largely at 60 FPS on PS3. The result of that is input latency is in the region of 77 milliseconds. Compare that to the 157 milliseconds we get from Battlefield 3, a 30 FPS game with drops below that, and it's clear why one felt tighter to control than the other. Now, to get these results, I've used a DualShock 4 wired directly to the PS3 system, and it's possible the USB interface adds latency compared to a regular PS3 pad. Even factoring that in, what's clear is the differential between the two franchises. Using the same method, that 80 millisecond gap leaves Call of Duty with a big advantage. DICE needed to adapt. At the very least though, the team made headway on PS3 before the move to PS4, with the release of Battlefield 4. Tests on the PS3 version of the game showed some improvement, cutting that latency down to a lesser 97 millisecond. It is improved. Even so, it wasn't until current gen machines that DICE could really bring its Frostbite engine close to Call of Duty's levels of response. It meant 60 Hz feedback became the goal for Battlefield 4 on PS4, in line with most major FPS titles this generation. Jumping between the generations with Battlefield 4 then, we go from PS3 at 97 milliseconds close to just 63 milliseconds on PS4. Clearly, the jump to 60 FPS plays a big part in this. But what happened to Call of Duty with newer titles, and has the situation improved for DICE on even later games? So let's get straight to it. Battlefield 1 here is running on a PS4 Pro to give us the best case scenario for frame rate. I paired that against Call of Duty Infinite Warfare, again the latest in the series built on revised technology from Advanced Warfare. And the result? Well, Battlefield 1 fetches a very sharp 56 millisecond return from pressing the R2 button. It is rapid, and the fastest I've recorded from the Battlefield series so far. On the other hand, Call of Duty leapfrogs it with an even lower 39 millisecond reading in Infinite Warfare. That's a lead of 1 frame, and it's the same story for Modern Warfare Remaster on PS4, again built on the same engine groundwork, where I get a 40 millisecond reading. Let's be clear here, 56 milliseconds is still a phenomenal result for Battlefield. Provided the frame rate sits at 60 FPS, the series has never felt snappier in the hand. This result even stands for the multiplayer mode, same R2 tests with the same turnout. It's worth stressing though that the perception of lag can come from all sorts of other factors besides the game renderer. The dead zones on the analog sticks are different for each game, for example. Also, your TV settings can have a big effect too, as well as the latency of your TV panel. But in general, 56 milliseconds in Battlefield 1 and 40 in newer Call of Duty games gives you the best chance of reacting to what's happening on screen. No doubt most of this is thanks to that move to 60 FPS. And here's why. If we look at a game like Killzone Shadowfall using the 30 FPS cap option in single player, the difference in response is substantial. In this case, I get 110 milliseconds in campaign when capped at 30 FPS, which shows the same issues with that refresh this gen as it did last gen. Sure, you can let it run unlocked, but the latency results become even more erratic. On the other hand, Killzone's multiplayer mode lets you see the same renderer operate at 60 FPS, this time hitting an average result of 89 milliseconds. That's a 20 millisecond difference, in large part to the bump in frame rate. Looking to other franchises, and that pattern again holds true. Blizzard's Overwatch, for example, scores a fantastic result from the R2 trigger press at 76 milliseconds to a result on screen. Amusingly, I discovered the first reaction comes from Overwatch's physics engine, rather than the gunshot. So in effect, a physics-based object in your sights will react one frame ahead of the gun. So in the end, I decided this physics-based reaction was the best way to measure the game. It's the first impact your trigger has on the game world. At 76 milliseconds, it's also in the same ballpark as the likes of Titanfall 2, which measures at 71 milliseconds from repeat R2 button presses. This is a surprise, given Titanfall 2 is, to my eye, one of the most responsive games I've played this generation. Especially on the left stick controls, wall running and strafing feels very sharp. But again, that 71 millisecond reading may be down to the difference between the stick reaction speeds and the latency from buttons and triggers. It's a strong result either way for a 60 FPS title, and within the reach of similarly fast-paced games like Overwatch. Out of interest, I also tried Doom on PS4 using the exact same method. This one actually gives some of the higher latency results from a 60 FPS shooter, at 86 milliseconds on average to fire a gun. It didn't matter which weapon I used, be it a shotgun or a pistol, but that number kept coming up. Put it down to the game's complex rendering pipeline, but clearly pushing for a maximum 60 FPS on console only takes you so far. Buffers for lighting, post effects, and even the method of VSync can all play a role in the time it takes for an image to hit the screen. At a 5-frame wait, Doom is on the higher side than what you'd expect, but it still feels rapid, and certainly there's no disconnect between the controller and the screen. On the other hand, we have a game like Halo 5 on Xbox One, this time tested using an Xbox One pad. And the result here is hugely encouraging. 343 Industries makes input latency a priority, and as the first console Halo to target 60 FPS, it really pays off. 63 milliseconds is the average readout from a trigger press, making it one of the fastest responding shooters on the market. So what's the takeaway? Well, while yes, Call of Duty is the latency winner overall, Battlefield 1 is no slouch at all. And we have to remember the Frostbite engine offers high-end technologies that contribute to the difference. Factor in the advanced physics-based destruction, vehicles, and a sandbox designed to maps, and no doubt DICE's engine has major advantages. Despite Battlefield's ambitions though, it also still beats games with far less sophisticated renderers. The fact it only just falls short of taking Call of Duty's crown as the fastest FPS on console is really to its credit. Anyway, that's enough testing from me. If you'd like to see more analysis on this subject, do feel free to like and subscribe. And remember, the source file to our videos are uploaded to our Patreon at digitalfoundry.net. You're welcome to check that out, but in the meantime, thanks for watching.